clear in my memory. It was Tuesday, like it is every Tuesday, but something was different or off. I found myself in the office, staring at my reflection in the glass window. I wasn't happy. In truth, I hadn't been for a long time. I had settled. I had settled for a job that didn't excite me, for a relationship that no longer fulfilled me, for a lifestyle that didn't challenge me in any way. But I didn't even notice it at first. It was subtle. This is good enough, I thought to myself, questioning it. Maybe this is just how life is supposed to be. I flat out rationalized being presently in the status quo. Deep down, I knew otherwise. Deep down, I knew I could do more. Settling isn't merely accepting less. It's closing the door on your true potential. It is a slow, silent killer that stops you from becoming whom you were meant to be. Once I understood that, everything looked different. Yet this was only the beginning. It didn't happen a day, but if I was willing to look for them, the signs were there. I spent years not confronting the truth, telling myself that a change would happen at the right time. But I always knew, the right moment never comes if you keep putting it off. I remember sitting on the couch one evening, scrolling through my phone, just mindlessly passing the time. I'd put in hours that day at a job I didn't love, in a career I was no longer passionate about. Yet, somehow I was telling myself that was all right. That's just how things were. And it hit me as I stared at the screen. I was wasting time I could never get back. And that's when it hit me, after years of doing so. I'd been telling myself I was content when really, I was stuck. The worst part? I wasn't alone. I knew plenty of people doing the same thing. People who were stuck in relationships that drained them, careers that didn't inspire them, and habits that were slowly eating away at their soul. The lie we tell ourselves is that it's good enough. But that's the danger of complacency. We fool ourselves into believing that just because something isn't awful, it's okay. It's not. The truth was, I was wasting my life, and worse, I was letting fear control me. Fear of change. Fear of failure. Fear of leaving my comfort zone. But I realized something that night. Fear is the enemy of growth. You can either stay in the safe zone, slowly dying inside, or you can take the leap and start fighting for the life you deserve. And that's when I made my decision. The question was no longer about when I would make a change, but how. Getting out wasn't a cakewalk. Probably it ranks among the top on my list of tough things. The day I chose to be different, I imagined it would be a swift and hassle-free affair. Big mistake. It felt as if I were scaling some endless mountain, every single step adding up to forget the heaviness of past choices. For so long, I had lived in denial, and suddenly awakening to the truth would feel as if I were stepping into the dark. I remember the reaction I received when I first disclosed my plan to my friends and family. The raised eyebrows, suspicious looks, and expressions of doubt and incredulity. What's wrong with the way things are? You've been okay all along, why change now? They would say. For a moment, I even had to doubt myself. Was there something I was messing up? Maybe they were right after all. Maybe this was just a bout of impulsiveness. But I knew the truth. I couldn't go on like this. The fear of regret, of looking back in 5 years from now and seeing that I'd done nothing to improve my life, was far worse than any discomfort I'd face in making the change. So I battled the fear. I quit my job, ended a relationship that no longer served me, and started making choices that didn't feel easy, but were necessary for me to evolve. It was exhausting. The second-guessing, doubts, and solitude. I felt like I was starting over, and it often felt like the world around me didn't understand why I was doing it. But the more I persisted, the more I realized something. Transformation does not come from a position of comfort. It comes from leaping into discomfort, the unknown, and being willing to fight for what you want, even when it feels like a lost cause. And that's when things started to shift. Slowly, but surely the pieces began to fall into place. The life I had settled for was crumbling, but in its place, a newer one was beginning to take shape. At first, I had no idea how much I had lost by staying in my comfort zone for so long. True, I had avoided the pain of change, but what I had not realized was the price I had paid. The dreams I never chased, the relationships I neglected, and the parts of myself that I allowed to die. One of the hardest realizations was understanding that settling didn't just cost me my present happiness. It had cost me my future. I had so many plans, so many dreams that I had put on the back burner. I told myself I'd get to them someday. But someday never came. Each day I spent waiting for the right time was a day I could never get back. I had inadvertently chosen mediocrity by choosing comfort over challenge. I had let fear dictate my actions, hold me back from rising up and doing what it would take to truly live the life I wanted. I could look back and see all the opportunities I'd missed out on simply because I was too comfortable to take a chance. The worst part? I had convinced myself that this was simply the way that life was. I did not realize how many opportunities one had wasted until I decided to take matters into my own hands. The price of settling was not only the opportunities that I had missed, and it was also the impact it had on the relationships that mattered most, the people that were harmed by my complacency, my lack of action, and my silence about what I wanted most. And that's when it hit me. Settling is a slow, quiet killer. Not only does it take your future away, it gradually destroys everything around you. But waking up to that realization was the first step toward taking my life back. It didn't come easily, but it was the only way forward. Breaking free from the chains of mediocrity was not an overnight process. It was not as simple as I quit my job or broke up with the relationships that no longer served me. It was a process that took time, reflection, and a lot of uncomfortable decisions. But there was a moment, a turning point, when I knew that I was finally starting to live for me and not for the expectations of everyone else. It was a morning, a few months after I had chosen to take charge of my life. I woke up early, for the first time in a long time, with purpose. I was not rushing through my day merely to be done with it. I was not trying to anesthetize myself with diversions. For the first time, I was engaged in my own life, and it felt liberating. I sat with a cup of coffee, and I felt that the burden that was holding me back, the burden of self-doubt and complacency, was slowly lifting. I was no longer in the shadow of fear. I had stepped into the uncomfortability and battled my own demons, and now I was beginning to reap the dividends. But it was not just about the external changes. It was about what I felt inside. I had stopped living for everyone else's approval and had started living for my own growth. It wasn't about perfection, but about getting better. The starting steps were the hardest, but with each decision to continue, I became more confident in my ability to handle whatever life threw my way. In that moment, I understood that freedom wasn't bailing on my responsibilities or avoiding pain. It was choosing to take control no matter how difficult the path. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I could say with sincerity that I wasn't settling anymore. I was living life on my own terms. As much as I would want to be able to say that once I was finally able to let go of my past, the rest just fell into place and life was easy breezy, that wouldn't be the truth. Real change is difficult. It's dirty. It's not as simple as snapping your fingers and suddenly having all you've ever wanted. It's about making choices on a daily basis that put you a little bit closer to the person that you're supposed to be, but don't necessarily feel good in the moment. Those first several months after I started to make these changes were tough. I had to get used to being uncomfortable. When you finally do take that step outside your comfort zone, you'll find that the universe does not serve everything you want on a silver platter. Rather, it attempts to test you. The people around you might not understand why you're doing what you're doing. Some might question you, others might try to pull you back, and you might even start to doubt yourself. One of the most difficult aspects I had to face was the loneliness that accompanied transformation. As I started to remove myself from situations and relationships that were stifling me, I realized that I was on a different path than many of the people I had been involved with. Some of them didn't understand the changes that I was making, and quite honestly, some of them hated me for it. I had to reconcile the guilt of leaving behind relationships that no longer served the individual I was becoming. It wasn't because these people were bad people, it's just that I had grown out of them, and that realization stung. But I had to tell myself that real growth sometimes involves leaving behind things that no longer do it for you, no matter how hard it is. In those moments of hardship, I wanted to give up. I wanted to go back to the ease of my old life, the one that was known, even though I knew it wasn't correct. But something inside me wouldn't allow it. I had come too far already, and I wasn't about to turn around now. Real change, I learned, isn't so much about avoiding the difficult moments. It's about facing them squarely, with the understanding that each challenge brings you one step closer to the individual you've always been meant to be. The journey is never easy, but it's always worth it. When I started changing my life, the last thing that I expected was that it wasn't just about me anymore. The people around me, the ones that had ridden the good and the bad with me, were now affected by the changes that I was undertaking. Some embraced it, some resisted it, and others rebelled outright. But the thing is, when you start to better yourself, it naturally has an impact on the people that are in your life. I had been so focused on my own growth that I hadn't thought about the stress that it would cause on my relationships. I had accepted toxic relationships for years, and now that I was trying to level up my life, the relationships needed to evolve with me or, in some cases, collapse. I remember one of the most difficult conversations I ever had with a close friend. They simply could not understand why I was changing so much. I watched the confusion in their eyes as they tried to absorb it all. They were being left behind, and for a while it felt like I was leaving them behind. But it was not a matter of leaving them. It was a matter of making space for both of us to grow. I had a few excruciatingly honest conversations where I took responsibility for my own failings. I apologized for the places where I had ridden on our current friendships and relationships, and not been as present or truthful as I could be. And I asked for the same effort and truth in return from them. It was not always easy. A few relationships completely ended, and that hurt. But I also began to form new ones based on mutual respect, trust, and the willingness to grow together. I discovered that connection occurs when you stop hiding behind your comfort zone and let others see you for who you truly are. And then there were the relationships that survived the transition, the ones where we were both willing to change. These relationships deepened, became more authentic and more fulfilling. They were no longer about who we once were, but who we were becoming together. And that was one of the most rewarding things in the entire experience. Realizing that genuine, profound relationships are a product of personal growth, not stagnation. Through it all, I knew that the strongest relationships are those where the two people are willing to grow, even if it means facing the ugly truth about themselves and about each other. In spite of all the changes I had made, there was still one enemy I couldn't shake off: doubt. No matter how many steps I had made in the direction of a better life, that nagging voice at the rear of my head just wouldn't let up, constantly warning me of the threats, the chances of failure, and the fear of not being adequate. The deeper I waded into this journey of reinvention, the more I realized how pervasive fear and self-doubt were in my life. I'd spent so many years letting fear make decisions for me, arguing myself into taking the secure route. And even now, here I was standing in the middle of forging a new life, and doubt seemed to be an old friend. There were moments when I questioned everything, the decisions I had made, the risks I had taken, and whether I was really cut out to make this work. I thought about how easy it would be to go back to my old, comfortable life, even though I knew it would only take me back to where I started, stuck, complacent, and unfulfilled. But I also discovered something important during this time. Fear is not something you can outrun. It is something you must confront head-on. You can't wait for the fear to subside before you take action. It won't. The key is to take action in spite of the fear. I had to rewire my relationship with failure. I had been working so hard not to fail, thinking that failure was to be feared, when really failure was just a natural part of the process. It was a sign that I was pushing myself, stretching my abilities, and learning. If I wasn't failing, then I wasn't trying hard enough. So, instead of letting doubt cripple me, I began to use it as energy. I turned my fear into drive. When that voice in my head whispered that I couldn't do it, I took a step forward. And although the fear never fully went away, I found that I could live with it and harness it to drive me. The journey wasn't in erasing doubt or fear. It was in learning how to keep moving forward despite their presence beside me. The moment I no longer let fear dictate my life was the moment that I finally started to live. The hardest part about change wasn't the big decisions, it was the small, everyday habits that followed. At first, I was exhilarated. I had momentum. I was making radical changes in my life, severing ties to what was keeping me back, and forging new ways that were right. But eventually, The thrill wore off, and the truth kicked in. Transformation wasn't a single act of bravery. It was long-term effort. The real test was in staying committed to the changes, even after the excitement wore off. I had to remind myself every day that change is a daily process and not a one-time event. It was normal to feel frustrated, especially when the outcome did not manifest immediately. All of this effort was challenged by me on some days to determine if it was even worth it. The path ahead still seemed long as well as unclear. But then I realized something significant. Success doesn't come from the flashes of passion that you have. It comes from the quiet moments, the moments when no one's watching, and when you're just doing the work because you understand that it's the right thing to do. It's those tiny, consistent actions, whether it's honoring a new habit, facing a fear, or simply plain showing up for yourself every day, that accumulate over time and lead to deep transformation. I started to love the grind. I came to understand that consistency wasn't perfection. It wasn't being at my best every moment, being motivated every moment, or winning every moment. It was choosing to keep going anyway. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that change doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the everyday choices, in the moments when you decide to keep going, even when the finish line is nowhere to be found. And over time, I started to notice results. Not just in my career or in my relationship, but in my mind, my discipline, and my willingness to meet challenges head-on. The more consistent I became, the more I realized that small changes, applied consistently, were more powerful than any dramatic change could ever possibly be. The key to lasting change is not in the big breakthroughs. It's in the small, daily steps you take every day. The bridge between the person you once were and the person you will become is built on the daily steps. And when I understood that, I knew that the effort, no matter how difficult or slow it was moving, was always worth it. As I continued down this journey of reinvention, one more thing became clear to me. The freedom I was seeking wasn't merely a question of breaking free of my old routines or circumstances. It was a question of taking full responsibility for my life, my choices, and the consequences of both. I had spent years blaming my unhappiness on everything outside of myself. I blamed my job, my relationships, my childhood, anything and everything except for myself. I thought that if I could just change these external things, then I would finally be happy. But the more things I changed, the more I found that the greatest freedom was when I stopped looking outward and started looking inward. Accepting responsibility was not about blaming myself or being guilty of past things. It was about recognizing that I was responsible for my future through the choices I made today. Every choice I made was mine, and with that, I had the power to create the life I wanted. This was a huge shift in attitude. I no longer saw myself as a victim of circumstance, but as the writer of my own destiny. I realized that even when life sends difficulties my way, as it certainly will, it's up to me how I respond to them. It wasn't a matter of waiting for things to change or for the world to offer me what I felt I had coming. It was doing what it required to bring about the changes I desired and stepping into the pain of responsibility. The power of responsibility is that it puts you in control. It removes the excuses and the what-ifs. I no longer questioned why things weren't working for me and instead questioned, what can I do to make it happen? The answer always resided within me. It was up to me to take action, to show up, and to create the life I truly wanted. This new mindset wasn't easy. There were still times when I wanted to slip back into the old me and blame the world for my problems. But every time I caught myself doing that, I reminded myself that I was in charge. That freedom, the freedom of being accountable for my own choices and being fully responsible for my life, was the most freeing feeling I have ever experienced. True freedom does not consist of being exempt from the issues of life, but in the responsibility that lies in them. And the moment I accepted that responsibility, things started falling in place. My attitude changed, my actions aligned with my goals, and for the first time in a long while, I felt fully in control of my life. One of the biggest surprises along the journey was the realization that growth has no destination. There is no spot in which you reach a point where you can say, I've arrived. I'm finished. In fact, the time when I thought I had arrived was the time when I realized I had just touched the surface. When I first started this journey, I thought that eventually, I'd have it all together. when the pain would end, and life would be this steady, smooth ride. But as I kept moving forward, I learned a painful truth. Growth is not linear. It's not a straight line to success. It's a cycle of ups and downs, breakthroughs and setbacks, forward movement and plateaus. I was faced with newer challenges that I wasn't prepared for, in spite of all the things I had conquered before. It wasn't because I failed, it was because growth doesn't cease. The more I knew, the more I learned how much there was still to know. The more I achieved, the more I realized that each success was but one step in a much larger journey. This realization was not disappointing. It was liberating. It meant that I was not stuck in a race to arrive at some particular destination. It meant that I could continue to grow, to improve, to get stronger, to get wiser, for the rest of my life. And that's the way it is with personal growth. It isn't a place of perfection, but a journey of continuous improvement on a daily basis. No matter how much you do or how far you go, there is always more to grow, more to enhance, and more to learn. For the first time in my life, I was on a journey of ongoing development. There was no arrival to reach, and that freed me from the anxiety of perfection. I didn't need to have it all figured out. I just needed to keep going, keep learning, and keep developing. And that was enough. The truth is, I'll never be finished growing. And that's okay. The journey doesn't have a finish line. It's a constant process of evolving into the person I am meant to be, one decision at a time. And now I embrace it with open arms. I am no longer scared of the unknown. I'm excited for it, because I know that the best version of me is always one step ahead. As I continued to walk, I began to notice something that I had overlooked for most of my life: the here and now. I had been so consumed with spending years attempting to reach the next big goal, the next accomplishment, the next stepping stone in my personal growth and development, that I had neglected the soft, gentle power of the present. Before, I always thought that peace and happiness came next. When I landed the perfect job, reached my desired level of success, or found the right person, then I'd really be content. But after all the moving I had done, I realized that peace doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from inside. It was a subtle shift, yet one that changed everything. No longer did I look for happiness in the future, but I started to find it in the present moment. I began to enjoy the small things: a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a conversation with a friend, the sun's warmth on my skin, the silence of just being alive. It is simple, and yet something I had not experienced for so long. I had been so focused on achieving, on changing, on becoming the individual I thought I had to be, that I neglected to just be. I was always striving, always focusing on what lay ahead, without ever taking the time to appreciate the process itself. But when I began to focus on the present moment, I realized that life wasn't just about the end result. It was about enjoying the process, the growth, and the moments that make up each day. This shift in mindset did not mean I no longer worked towards achieving my goals. It did not mean I no longer pursued my dreams or no longer pushed myself to grow. But it did mean I no longer sacrificed my own happiness for something that was always just out of reach. I no longer waited for the perfect time and learned to live completely in the time that I was living. The point is, peace doesn't arrive in the future. It's something that you find in the present. And once I finally realized that, everything shifted. I began to delight in every step of the journey, because I knew that each step was a part of something bigger. And that's when I felt a deep sense of peace, not because all was as it should be in my life, but because I had finally learned to accept all of it as it was, right here, right now. As my transformation continued, I was confronted with a difficult lesson: learning to let go of my desire for control. I had tried most of my life to be in control. I needed to be in control of all aspects of my life, making the correct decisions, and having each outcome precisely as I had intended it. But as I started pushing myself to change and evolve, I saw how little control I actually had. The more I struggled to be in control, the more I became frustrated and overwhelmed when life didn't turn out as expected. I was exerting so much energy trying to control the direction that I wasn't allowing life any room to organically unfold. I didn't know it at the time, but my desire for control was preventing me from surrendering to the growth process. I found out the hard way that no matter how much I attempted to plan and manipulate outcomes, I could not foresee every twist and turn in the road. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes what happens to us is completely outside of our control. Instead of struggling against this fact, I had to accept it. Letting go was not easy, and it did not happen overnight. There were times when I was scared to step back and allow things to unfold. What if I failed? What if things did not work out? But the more I let go, the more I understood that it was not about giving up or being passive. It was about trusting the process and allowing myself to flow along with it. The freedom that came from letting go of control was unprecedented. I started embracing uncertainty and discomfort, knowing these were the places where real growth happened. Instead of trying to control the outcome, I started doing the things that were within my control, my attitude, my effort, and my willingness to learn. The rest I had to release. It was difficult to let go, but I knew I had to try. I learned that life is so much more fruitful when you release the need to control all the details and learn to trust the process. You can't force growth and you can't control everything that happens, but you can control how you react to it. As soon as I understood that, I was finally able to stop fighting life and start working with it. Letting go of control wasn't the same as giving up or no longer caring or trying. It was the same as my starting to live more openly, more acceptingly, and with more trust in myself and the process. And in doing so, I found a peace I had never known. As I traveled my path of growth, something within me shifted in a manner that I never expected. I began to feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For so long, I had been focused on what was missing from my life, what I didn't have, what I hadn't yet achieved, and what I was still working towards. But as I let go of the need for control and started to embrace life for what it was, here's what I discovered. There is power in gratitude, even in the worst of circumstances. I had forgotten for so long the daily miracles that occurred in my own life because I had been too focused on the big picture, always reaching for something more. But when I finally embraced the here and now and opened myself up to the gratitude of the small things, the individuals who had remained with me, the lessons that I had discovered, the opportunities that I had had, I started seeing my life in a completely different way. Gratitude became my lifeline. It was not just thanking God for the good. It was learning to thank Him for the challenges, setbacks, and roadblocks that entered my life. I realized that every challenge was an opportunity to grow, and every failure was a test of resilience. What once appeared to be stumbling blocks were now stepping stones. What I found was that gratitude doesn't only change your attitude, it changes your entire experience of life. The more I focused on what I did have instead of what I didn't have, the more complete my life was. Gratitude didn't just change the way I looked at the world. It changed the way I felt about myself. I started a daily gratitude journal, listing the things I was thankful for each day, regardless of how small. Some days it was easy. A beautiful sunrise, a meaningful conversation, a thoughtful act. Other days it required more effort to think of things to be grateful for. But even on the hard days, I attempted to discover something, anything, even if it was merely that I was still alive, still fighting, still growing. By focusing on gratitude, I was able to shift my focus. Instead of complaining about what I didn't have or the difficulties that I was facing, I was able to determine value in every experience, every relationship, and every lesson. The more I focused on gratitude, the more my life began to shift in ways that I never could have imagined. It wasn't that all of a sudden everything was ideal. It was that I had shifted my focus to what was already ideal. Gratitude doesn't just change your mind, it changes your entire life. And in incorporating it into my daily life, I realized that there was always something to be thankful for, even in the absolute worst of situations. Once I embraced that, the outlook of my life was forever changed. As I neared the end of my transformation, I was confronted with what I had dreaded my entire life: uncertainty. I had been raised with the misguided notion that certainty was the way to achievement and happiness. I figured that if I could just have it all mapped out, if I knew exactly where I was going, how I was getting there, and what the future held, then I could finally relax. But the older I got, the more I realized how little control I actually had over what was coming next. No matter how much planning and preparing I did, life had a way of its own in throwing curveballs. It wasn't until I finally accepted this uncertainty that I began to experience the kind of freedom that I had been searching for. I struggled against the unknown at first. It was terrifying, disorienting, and outside of my control. I tried to predict every outcome, to chart every step. But the thing is, no matter how hard you try to dominate the future, the unknown is always there, and it will always surprise you. One day, I finally stopped fighting it. I let go of the need for absolute certainty and embraced the mystery of life. I allowed myself to feel the fear, to jump into the unknown, and to trust that I would be okay no matter what happened. That was the moment it struck me. Uncertainty does not have to be something to be feared. It can be something to be accepted. By embracing uncertainty, I no longer limited myself by what was predictable and safe. I was open to new experiences, new possibilities, and new opportunities. I realized that it was okay not to have all the answers, that I did not need to know exactly what the future held. What mattered was that I could adjust, be present, and trust in my own ability to manage whatever came my way. This shift in mindset wasn't without its challenges. There were still times when I was afraid, when the future seemed precarious and daunting. But instead of letting that fear paralyze me, I kept reminding myself that growth happens only when you're open to stepping into the unknown. The more I allowed myself to embrace uncertainty, the more liberated I felt. I stopped stressing about the what-ifs and started living in the moment, focusing on what I could control. My choices, my actions, and my attitude. The truth is, life is unpredictable. We can't control what happens to us, and we can't predict the future. But what we can control is how we respond to it. Embracing the unknown is one of the most freeing things you can do. It takes the stress of perfection and control off your shoulders and gives you the freedom to live life to the best of your ability, without fear of what will or won't happen. As I look back at everything I've learned, I see that the journey doesn't end here. The road ahead is just as uncertain as the one I've walked, but I've learned to embrace it. The freedom I once sought in certainty is now found in uncertainty, and that has been the most important lesson of all. Throughout this entire journey, I discovered something essential. Success is not arriving at a status, achieving some destination, or accumulating wealth or fame. I had equated success with these things for the majority of my life, thinking that if I could just get to some point, then I would have finally arrived. But as I grew and matured, I discovered that success is living a life of purpose. In the early stages of transformation, I was driven by the possibility of fixing everything. My professional life, my relationships, my personal life. But somewhere along the journey, I realized that the most significant transformation wasn't in what I had done or in what I had accomplished. It was in the greater clarity of why I was doing all of it in the first place. Living on purpose was a matter of understanding my values, my passions, and my why. It was a matter of making my actions congruent with what I wanted, not necessarily what I thought I was supposed to do. I started to challenge the goals I was going after and ask myself, is this what I really want? Or is it what I think will make me happy? I realized that many of the things I had been working towards were external markers of success, and while important in and of themselves, weren't satisfying at a deeper level. The work I was doing, the relationships I was building, and how I spent my time were no longer just about checking boxes or reaching external validation. They were then about something much more significant, adding to a life that was representative of my true identity. Living on purpose also involved letting go of the idea that success is the same for all people. I had spent so much of my life comparing myself to others, measuring my success by theirs. But the truth is, success is personal. It's what makes you feel whole, what gets you excited, and what gives you a sense of meaning and fulfillment. As I embraced this new definition of success, I started to prioritize what was truly essential. The relationships that nourished me, the work that challenged me, and the personal growth that kept me moving. I realized that when I aligned my life with my purpose, everything else fell into place. The goals that I had set for myself seemed less daunting because they were driven by something deeper than other people's expectations. They became part of a bigger vision, a vision of having a life that was real and authentic to who I was. Success, I realized, isn't about having it all together or doing it all on a checklist. It's about living intentionally, following your passions, and making choices based on what you value most. When you live intentionally, success isn't so much about the destination as it is about the journey, about who you are in the process of becoming. And now, today, as I reflect back on my life, I can say with sincerity that I do feel successful, not because I have all that I used to think that I wanted, but because I'm living a life that's in integrity with who I am, who I'm attempting to be, and how I'm looking to contribute to the world. And for the very first time, that feels like true success.